try new things. And unless you try new things, you won't do new things. And people get old very fast in knowing conventional wisdom. Everybody at Google knows how to do the internet till Facebook came along. And Facebook knew what to do till Twitter came along, and sort of these new things keep getting reinvented, and you go, duh. And 4 years later, it feels like conventional wisdom. I remind people that in January 1 of 2007, the iPhone didn't exist. It's pretty stunning. If I'd said to anybody, Motorola and Nokia would be largely irrelevant to mobile phones in January 1 of 2007, you would have laughed at me. Expert opinion would have said, absolutely, these are the forecasts, extrapolations of the past. So these new things keep happening. Facebook practically didn't exist other than a few campuses.
Would you, in 2007, have said Nokia and Motorola will be irrelevant within a few years, or even you didn't see that coming?
Well, what I do say and would say is nothing's guaranteed. Okay? My philosophy in life is I don't mind failing, trying new things, but it better be relevant if we succeed. I don't mind the low probability of success, but it better be impactful if we do succeed. And that's sort of my key criteria now about what I spend my time on. Is failure doesn't matter, and I often say my willingness to fail is what gives me the ability to succeed. Well, most people hate failure, and I'm not embarrassed. And, you know, bloggers like you like to write about the failure people who are visible. But, in fact, failure doesn't matter.
That was me.
You're mean to me.
Tell me what your best failure was, as in just the biggest train wreck that you actually think it was almost exactly right to do that.
So, you know, boy, it's hard because I've failed so many times. I've probably failed more times than anybody in this room and almost anybody in the VC community. So,
I bet I've been fired more times.
That may be true. I learned this a long time ago. We did a startup called Go. It was about pen computing. And we thought this was this sexy pen tablet. Okay?
Late 90s?
Late 80s, actually.
Okay.
We did a whole new operating system. It was pretty interesting. And we sort of believed our own bullshit. In fact, their logo was the pen's the phone. In fact, we were so enamored with it, John Doerr and I were both on the board, spent a lot of money, time, visibility, and a big splat. And what I realized afterwards, somebody said, the right thing to do towards the end of this would be to just make a great email platform. Right? The point was not the pen, but the mobility. The interesting thing that happened was it was an expensive lesson, but everything we did wrong, we learned a lot from. And we made more money doing tablets and things, classes of mobility kinds of things, because of what we learned from that failure. We made more money, and the fund made more money. So failure, again, is you don't want failure, but you shouldn't be afraid of it, because if you're afraid of it, what you'll do is avoid all the risks. You'll de-risk something to the point where the consequences of success are inconsequential. And you see VCs doing this all the time. They reduce the risk in the startup to the point if they're successful, it doesn't really matter. It makes no difference.
Thinking about the late 80s, that's when Steve Jobs started Next Computer, which was a fairly audacious idea for a new computer. It was hardware focused and operating system. They eventually ditched the computer as a failure, maybe ahead of its time. Operating system went on to be acquired by Apple, and we all know what happened after that. So again, is that an example of failure that worked out well?
Well, what's great about that is Steve wasn't afraid to fail, especially if something visible. Because the more visible something is, the more afraid they are of failing. And that's what necessarily ensures its failure. Its inconsequential sort of nature. What's great about Steve is he's not doing business plans. Right? He has a vision, and he has religious passion for a vision. So most great entrepreneurs I've seen almost always have passion for a vision. It's not a business plan, it's not practical stuff. It's so much conviction that when they run into a problem, yeah, if you're a pragmatist, you run into a problem, you try and go do something else. If you have passion for your vision, you keep banging your head against the wall till you crash through it. And most entrepreneurs are successful because of that. And so I'm a real believer in the Steve view of, if I believe in this, everybody told him you couldn't have a phone without keyboards. Nobody would use it. He had a passion for this great design that didn't have a keyboard. Guess what?
He once said, I think this might not be exactly, but he said, I'd rather be a pirate than join the Navy. And sounds like that's exactly what you're talking about.
I am talking about that, and I'd say, there's enough of us, and I include myself in this, where we sort of like challenging things, just by our very nature. If something's a certain way, I want to sort of upend it. I sort of had a habit at age 12 of insulting priests in India, because it was fun for me. I was a troll. And still am. And my son, who just started at Stanford, sort of his self-image is of a troll. He likes to challenge anything anybody says. And there is fun in that. Especially if it's a lot of conventional wisdom, challenging it is just fun. And sometimes you challenge it and then say, oops, now I got to justify it. But that's okay. But I think the more important part of that is having a vision and having enough passion to be religious about it, and then having enough flexibility to adjust it as you learn more. Not because some blogger or some journalist is telling you to do it. And enough people told Steve he should put a keyboard on his phone. And all the reasons why it would fail. He believed in it, but he didn't stop taking input. And, he kept adjusting it. In fact, it sort of started with the iPod, not the phone. And he made the iPod into a phone. And he made it into a nano, and he experimented a lot. But he had a very clear vision too.